Hello, and welcome to the third in our series of & Co online seminars about making money. Because we're worth it. The tagline of a range of advertisements around beauty products. Are we worth it? Are we sure? Are we really sure? Now's the time to stop apologising for our own value and make sure that we get what we deserve. I'm Gill Thewlis. I spent a good part of the last 20 years working with arts organisations and helping them to become better businesses. So just to recap, remember for the third time, not for profit doesn't mean make no profit. It means make lots of profit, keep some in reserve and put the rest to good use. Today we're going to talk a bit about pricing and how to make sure that you're building enough profit margin into the activities that you're charging for. Just to recap, mindset and language. Think in terms of profit and loss rather than surplus and deficit. This is where we left last time. Decide in advance which activities are going to make money, which are going to break even, and which you will be subsidising. Stick to your decisions. Embed them in your plans and operations and in internal language. Think of and treat the people that you're working with, whatever you call them, audiences or customers, think of them as customers whose needs you serve, rather than them serving you. And how can you serve them better? You need to continually ask yourself that question. And be prepared to say no when something's not financially viable. We'll come back to that. And be prepared to step outside your comfort zone and engage with the mainstream, because it may well be that what you have is valuable to organisations outside the sector. So, whatever you're doing, price it right. Make absolutely sure you understand your own internal financial model and know how easily you can lose money as well as make it. This means making sure that you're clear about the total costs of any activity that you're undertaking and the total revenues, and where you are actually making money and where you're not. Don't stop at full cost recovery. Some of you will have got quite good at that, but make sure you add your intended profit margin and a contingency, and never apologise for doing this. It's how the rest of the commercial world works, so there's no reason why you shouldn't work in exactly the same way. Make sure you stick to the plan. Never overspend. And included in that is never spend more time on something than you've originally envisaged. And if you're remaining in a project environment, do not do more or spend more if you've already delivered at a lower cost than you anticipated. Let's say you've just completed a £20,000 project and it's actually cost you £2,000 less than you thought it was going to cost, but you've actually delivered what you said you were going to deliver. In that situation, don't think to yourself, oh, well, I'll do a bit more then. The best thing to do is keep that money, put it in your reserves. Continually monitor your progress and don't be afraid to renegotiate a project or a contract if the demands from the customer changes. If the customer wants more, make sure they're going to pay more. And this is really, really important. Make sure everybody involved in your organisation, whatever they do in your organisation, understand the commercial realities of your situation and the impact that they have on the bottom line. Because if you have a large team, it's quite possible that only the most senior people really understand the financial impact, and it's important that when people are making their own decisions about their own work, that they know what impact they're going to have. So how do you get fair value? The first thing is know your place in the market and who your direct and indirect competitors are. And quite often, competitors will not necessarily be obvious, so spend a bit of time thinking about who you're really competing with. Never assume that the arts are worth less than anything else. People make choices about what they spend money on. If you don't believe that what you're offering is of high value, then how do you expect anybody else to? This is a sort of mindset shift, and we have to stop assuming that people are not going to be prepared to pay for something that is of good quality. Consider the value to the customer, not just the cost to you, and we'll come back to that a bit later. If you find yourself being continually knocked down in negotiation, get some negotiation skills training. Learn how to be harder-nosed about going into that kind of negotiation. And be prepared to walk away. Whenever you're going into a negotiation with an organisation or setting up a project, make sure you know what the full cost implications of things are, and know the level below which you cannot afford to do something. And as soon as you start to get towards that level in the negotiation, be very prepared to walk away. Always know what you can give away and what you can't, and stand firm. The people that underprice will eventually disappear from the market. And also take heart. One of the things that I notice that's happening in this turmoil and as the world is changing is that gradually everybody is having to understand how much things really cost. And that will play to your advantage. If the world is gradually becoming more understanding of how much things really cost, when you want to make a case for putting some of your prices up, say for project delivery, it will be easier to make that argument. So let's just talk about 5 ways of pricing things. First of all, break-even budget, which a lot of you will be familiar with, cost plus a margin, commodity market price, time-based pricing, and economic value to the customer. We're just going to talk about each of these for a moment. First of all, break-even budget. All of you that run projects will be familiar with this. So, normal arts funding model, your cost equals your revenue. It should always include an element of overhead, and I would say should always include contingency. You may not always do that, but it's important to do that when you're making a budget. Obviously, you use this when you're running wholly funded projects, because that's the way they tend to operate. You're delivering self-subsidised projects, same principles apply. And when you have specifically decided to do so, not as a default position. In a mixed economy, only some of your activities will operate with a break-even budget. I would say also, when you're doing break-even budgeting, try and make sure that you include an element of contribution to reserve in your overhead, if you possibly can. Cost plus a margin. This is normally used in retail. Typically, it's the cost of the goods plus X%. You have to know your break-even position if this is going to work, and which means you have to know the level of revenue below which this model loses money. You need to use this when you're reselling product. You have enough volume for this kind of business to keep above break-even, and in a situation where your fixed costs are low and your variable costs are high. Now, there are norms around this kind of stuff. Typically, your high street fashion retailer is going to be adding 200% to the cost of the garments or the accessories that they're buying from the manufacturer. That's a huge markup. So another example is in a wholesale market, say for building materials, normal markup would be about 30%. So there are norms in different markets. Those of you in visual arts who've worked with galleries will know what galleries will typically take. So you use this in a situation where you're reselling product. Commodity stroke market price applies in volume businesses. So, for example, something you might be familiar with, web development. You can get simple websites for £250. That's a commodity price. Everybody knows that you can get simple websites for £250. Often indicates a saturated market and oversupply. Another example is one-day workshops in schools. If you're an organisation, it's highly unlikely that you can afford to do these because the prices for these have been pushed down so low that quite often only sole traders can afford to deliver them. That's an example of oversupply and market saturation. So I'd avoid situations like this as much as possible because it's quite difficult to make money. If you do decide to enter this market, you have to make absolutely sure you make money on everything you sell and watch every penny and micromanage your costs. Because at this level, the margin between your cost and your revenue is likely to be quite small. Time-based pricing. This is typically day rate based and it's used for the most part in consultancy businesses. Often there are market rate boundaries, however, rare expertise commands higher prices, and this is all about supply and demand. So you might use this when you're selling your time or your expertise. You might use it in a project situation, so where there's quite a lot of people's time and effort in your projects. You might use it to increase your project revenues and prices and to make sure that your time is costed appropriately in your break-even project budget. So it might be an element of a bigger budget. So let's just think about this for a minute. The thing to do to get this right is to calculate your annual fixed cost base. So for example, you might have a person who effectively costs you £50,000 a year. Now, that would include not just what you're paying them, but what it costs to employ them, the space that they inhabit, and all the other costs attached to that person. So that's not just about their salary. You need then to calculate the likely annual earning days. And we're going to look at how you do that, because quite often, in my experience, people underprice their time. And it's important to know how many days in a year you're likely to be able to really charge for. So, let's look at that. Total days in a year, 165. Let's take off the weekends, which leaves you with 260. Take off the statutory bank holidays, takes you to 252. We all need a bit of time off. Let's be generous and let's assume that you're going to have 5 working weeks off a year, so that'll take you down to 227 working days. And, we have to allow for the odd day of not being very well, so let's take 5 days as an average, so that leaves you with 222. Most of us have admin and stuff to do that's got nothing to do with delivering for a customer. It might be calculating our expenses, all sorts of things. So let's allow 1 day a month for that. And then let's think about what's prudent in terms of the proportion of your time that a client is actually going to pay for. I work as a consultant. I think that I can probably reasonably get paid for 50% of my working time. Very large consultancies, Big Four consultancies, work on a utilisation rate for their delivery people, their consultants and their junior consultants, of 75% of time. So probably your prudent level is somewhere in between the two. And that depends on how much of that person's time is involved in going out and getting the work. Because you don't get money for that. You only get money for delivering the work. And that's why I pitch this at 50%. So, out of a total possibility of 365 days in a year, I think total likely working days is more likely to be about 105. So let's go back to our calculation. £50,000 annual fixed costs, say. You have to do your own calculation about this and make sure that you are perhaps over-egging it rather than under-egging it. If we say that our total earning days are 105, if we divide our total fixed costs by our earning days, that means our minimum day rate on this basis is £476 a day. Now, this is not outside the boundaries of possibility in an organisation. And if you're charging, if you do run an organisation and you have premises and you have a range of people and you're paying them reasonably, it's quite possible that your minimum day rate for delivery has to be around this level. May not be £476, maybe £400 a day. And typically in the arts, this is a high rate. But it may be that this is what you have to charge in order to make sure that you're not losing money. So it's very important that you get this calculation right. And in the last year or so, I've come across a range of situations where organisations have gone through this process and realised that the truth of the situation, that they have been underpricing their time consistently in projects and in any consultancy delivery that they're doing. Finally, economic value to the customer. And this is something that perhaps you're not familiar with at all. This is about charging what the customer will pay, not what the thing cost you to deliver. It does require the ability to judge the perceived value from a customer perspective. It means you have to know your customer quite well. Brand strength or celebrity is often key. Think about how much people are prepared to pay for designer handbags, designer clothes, high-end cosmetics. The margins on these things are enormous, not just because of a retail markup, but because people perceive them to be of very high value. So, if you think you can make this work, be prepared to make significant margins and don't feel guilty about it. So use this. When you understand your customer well enough, your product is a low cost to you and a high value to the customer. So, for example, let's say that you're working with somebody who is particularly prominent in their field. What would it cost you to give people access to that person, or to give them an insight into how that person works? Might not cost you very much. People might be prepared to pay quite a lot of money for that. Think about that. You've also got to be confident enough to pull it off. So, what is it that you can offer at what might feel to you to be prohibitively high price, but costs you very little? Spend a bit of time thinking about that, and I'm sure most organisations, particularly those that have been going for a long time, can think of at least something that they could make quite a lot of money out of. I hope you've enjoyed our series. That's the end of it for the moment. If you've got any questions at all about the material that's been delivered, please do get in contact with us, and thank you once again for being with us in this series of 3.